take it away, Deborah.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome for GroupBy America and starting off for the dev track. Like, I'm really excited to be here. I'd say thank you to the organizers for having me, but really y'all voted for this. So I'm excited. So thank y'all for voting. And again, let's get this started. So, all right, one thing important, and I love that the GroupBy has it, they have a code of conduct. Please make sure you read it and follow by it. And thank you very much, GroupBy, for implementing this. So our session today, practical starter guide to SQL Notebooks. And I forgot to fix that logo because I did this for Data Weekender and it's now GroupBy. I'm excited for GroupBy just as much as I was last time. So we'll fix that later. But really, it's a practical starter guide to notebooks. But that's really not what I wanted to call this presentation. This is really the true name. I really wanted to learn how to use SQL Notebooks, but I don't have time to figure it out at work either. So let's figure out how to do this stuff together. Because the thing is, I am not a SQL Notebooks expert. I promise you. I've been playing with it and I'm figuring out how to use it and when to use it. But it's a new tool and we're always so busy at work. It's really hard to figure out how do you find time to play with a new tool, figure out what it can do and what it can do for you. And I had been seeing SQL Notebooks in various presentations and I was like, that's really kind of cool. I kind of like how they do this and how they do that. So how can I use it? So I put this presentation together as a way to kind of answer that question and say, okay, how can I do this? So for those of you who don't know me, here's a little bit of information. I've been working as a database professional for 20 years, mostly with SQL Server, a little bit with some of the other relational databases, just enough so I could do some damage. I mainly work with transactional databases, but I've done a little bit with marts and warehouses, just enough so I could do some damage. I'm a board member of the New England SQL Server User Group. It is based in Boston, Massachusetts. So that's normally where I am based. I speak at other SQL Saturdays and user groups. I'm very proud that last year I was announced as an Idera Ace class of 2020. So thank you to Idera for supporting speakers in the community. And if you were on a little earlier, you heard that, yes, I won Speaker Idol last year at Past Summit. So I'm the reigning champion and I'm very excited to speak at Summit. That's not the important stuff about me, though. The important stuff is that I'm the alto section leader of my choir. I'm very proud of that, and I love my altos. I used to do bluegrass jams regularly before the pandemic when it was safe. So hopefully I'm looking forward to doing that again because I miss making music in the same room at the same time with other people. I've been learning guitar and I have a mandolin that I'm trying to learn. And I'm a little bit of a musical theater geek. So definitely feel free to chat with me about musical theater later because I love it. It's beautiful. So, but that's the important stuff, but that's not why we're here. We're here to talk SQL Notebooks. So here's our agenda. We're going to look at the SQL Notebooks interface and get familiar with it. And we're going to look at a couple different use cases. We're going to look at troubleshooting, maybe some testing. There's a lot of community stuff involved with Azure Data Studio and a little bit of the interaction with Management Studio. So this session is a little different for me in the fact that it's all going to be demos because for me trying to figure out how to use a tool, slides aren't going to use it. You want to jump into the tool, you want to get your hands in it, work with it, figure out how it goes. So let's go over and let's work with that. So you can see this is Azure Data Studio and I've got a couple different notebooks that we're going to work with. For those who are unfamiliar with Azure Data Studio, you have all these icons along the side, but this is the icon we're going to be working with, and this will get us all of our notebooks. I happen to have a folder open, and so I can see the notebooks that I have in that folder, and they're all right here. I can open a notebook from here. I can open notebooks in a folder. I can collapse everything. If I had more things open, and a couple other actions if I wanted to add a notebook. The other thing is you can do things like you have search results. So if I wanted to search for a notebook, I could do it here and my results would be down here. And this is a little, you can move those around to pinned notebooks. I decided to pin the first notebook so you can see. So it's always here. I can go into my notebooks tab. I guess this is a tab or sidebar, and I can see all the notebooks that I have pinned for easy access. And then there's a section for provided books. There is a book that's provided for you, SQL 2019 guide. It is dealing with big data clusters. So if you want to look at the guide, I can go here. I opened it, and I have my provided book and all the things that go with it. So it's kind of cool that they gave you a starter notebook to look with when you download Azure Data Studio right there. So we're going to close that because we don't need that right now. But all right, so let's collapse those, and we're just going to start here. The one thing to remember with notebooks, or one thing to know about notebooks, is everything is based on a cell, and you have two types of cells. You have code cells and you have text cells. And for me, some of the things with the text cells and having this sort of documentation, and actually kind of a nicer looking documentation rather than opening something up and seeing lines or the slash asterisk all over the place with green text or whatever it happens to render in whatever mode your setup is. You can actually have like actual text and a little bit of formatting with it, so it's actually legible. So that's the first thing is how notebooks are broken up. So you've got text and you have code. Run all would run all of the code that you have in your notebook. We'll not go into this too much, but we'll deal a little bit with this. And this is actually one of the things that got me interested in playing a little more with Azure Data Studio and with SQL Notebooks, is the fact that you have access to these different kernels. You have SQL, you have some Spark, you have Python and PowerShell. And most DBAs and database professionals are going to work with SQL, and they're going to work with PowerShell. So to have one tool that you can do both in is it's convenient. It's kind of nice to work with that way. So right now I'm going to stick with SQL, and then we're going to have connections that we can deal with, and I'll get to that in a little bit later. A couple other things to note is you can collapse all your cells, where you can see down here, I have two statements. Collapsing all the cells means that I only see a little bit of it. Clear results, we'll get to why that's important later. So those are the ones we care about. This one right here is not trusted. I'm not going to worry about that right now because, one, I'm not quite sure what that means, but I'm also not connected to anything. So I don't think that we need to worry about that right now. So let's start working with cells. And the reason I'm starting here is it's a new tool. You need to know where it is, and you want to understand the behavior of the different components you're working with. And the idea of cell is definitely a little different from how we're used to Management Studio or pretty much any other query window where you've got that one page and you put everything in there. Here we're breaking things up into cells. So what does that mean? And how do you work with it? And so that's where we're going to get started. Right now I've highlighted the first cell, which is a text cell. And there are a couple of different things we can do with it. And you can see right here based on these different icons. If I wanted to get rid of it, I can delete it. I can move the cell up. I can move the cell down. And these are some of the newer features in the past couple releases that got added. I can add a cell, or I can edit the cell that I'm on. There's a couple other different things. I can change it to a code cell. And then I also have the option to add cells above or below, whether they're text or code. So let's play with this cell here, and let's do some editing. I can click this button and I can start editing. You can click X to get out, or you can just click outside the cell and it'll take you out of that edit mode. You can also double click inside and you can edit from there. Now, there are a couple different things we can do when modifying a cell, and it's a text cell. First of all, you'll notice here, these things look pretty familiar because these are things that we already kind of deal with in a normal text cell editor from Word or from any WYSIWYG text editor that we may have. And because by default, that's what we have. If you don't want to use WYSIWYG, you've got a couple options. There is Markdown available, and that's actually how it started. The WYSIWYG got added, I think it was in June June or July with the Azure Data Studio release. And that's actually one thing to also keep in mind is Azure Data Studio has releases pretty much every month. So things change. So this WYSIWYG editor and having these options was, talking about changes. I had just done a presentation and I just tried to convert everything over to see what it was like. And I was about to hit post for a blog post that I was working on when they did the release adding this. So I'm like, oh, great. Now I have something new to go play with. So it's interesting that it went from Markdown to adding the WYSIWYG pretty quickly. But if you like Markdown, you definitely have those options. You have a split view where you can see the Markdown information here, but you can also get the preview of how it looks. Or if you just want to work with Markdown directly, you can do that here. I'm pretty much a WYSIWYG person. So we can go back over here, and that gets us back to our WYSIWYG editor. WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. So let's play a little and let's figure out how to format. So the first one here is we can make something bold. We can put something in italics. We can underline. We can highlight. If we wanted to add some code text, we can say, hello world. Whoops, I'm still in highlighter mode. Let's see. The problem of typing in a demo, right? Code. And I'm still in highlight mode. So like with any editor, you have to figure out how you highlight, unhighlight. Maybe this is where you can go to Markdown. You'd say, hey, that's not quite what I wanted, but, oh, it removed it. So it's all good.
I'd say you found a bug.
Possibly. And the thing is, if you find bugs with Azure Data Studio, I'm going to put this out here too. The team responsible for this is so responsive to this, and they are super involved because they want your feedback on this. If you find a bug, they're like, please let us know, we want to fix it. If you're having trouble using stuff or you want a new feature, let us know and we'll work on it. So if that's a bug, then yeah, we'll definitely have to kind of let them know. And hey, it's recorded, I can show them. It's a little awkward, but again, there's someone who they really do seem to believe in this product and want you to use it and want you to help be involved in making fixes for it. So I've really been super impressed by that. So I just want to put that out there that if you do find issues with Azure Data Studio, definitely let them know, create the bug, and they'll work on fixing it if there's issues. So yeah, that was interesting. All right. So again, it's playing with formatting as we always do. So now images. So this is actually one of the features that I think got added this September, where you can now have images added. So I'm going to go into, whoops, wrong place. Let's add an image. So I have the image from GroupBy, and I can just copy and paste it in. Now I can't edit in here right now. So if you need editing, let's say you took an image that's too big and you wanted to make it smaller, you need to edit that outside and then cut and paste and put it into Azure Data Studios. But still being able to copy and paste and put an image in here, it's pretty cool. And so you can really make some really nice looking documentation for your notebooks so people know what they're looking at. So, a couple other things you can do is you can also number, bullet points. You also have other options, the different headers you can put in. See right here, let's do header 1. No, that's too big. Header 2. This is 3. Maybe I want this at 2. Nah, that should be 3. So again, you can play with the editor, make things look the way you want them to. And so it's really good for documentation to have that sort of thing. And especially because someone else is going to be looking at this. So if you can make it nice looking documentation, easy to read, put all the information you need to, you can do it right here. So that's seeing how people have been using the text cells and notebooks has been one of the things that I've really appreciated about it and made me say, hey, I should look into notebooks a little more. So I don't know if that has any questions, but let's kind of go on to moving the behavior of cells. Any questions so far, Daniel?
You've got around 50 very focused attendees, and they're too busy to ask questions. So
all right. Well, if you have questions, make sure you put them in the Slack channel. Are you doing chat on Zoom as well, or the Q&A?
I guess, yeah.
Okay, so put your questions out there. Hopefully we'll get to them as you have them. So the next thing is the behavior of the cells, especially code cells, because, all right, I'm breaking out my work into different cells. How do they all work together? Because Management Studio, we kind of know how things work. You highlight stuff, you run it, or you run the whole script, or different ways that you can do it. So what is the behavior of a code cell? So I've got two statements here. Let's start with a basic thing. I've got two statements in a cell. So how does that work? Well, right now, looking here, you can see select connection. I don't have anything connected right now. So if I were to run this, SQL Notebooks, Azure Data Studio, they know that. So they're going to say, hey, what would you like to connect to? So I've been playing with some of these recently. So I'm going to use a SQL Notebooks connection here. I'm not connected to a database by default. So I'm just going to hit connect. And I'm going to run my two statements, and hey, they worked. Now, when I'm using Management Studio or another query window, even if you were to use a query window within Azure Data Studio, you could highlight a statement and run, and it would run just that statement. So does that work here? No, it doesn't. So one thing to understand for behavior is it's an all or nothing based on what you have in the code cell. So that's the first thing you need to learn. It makes it handy to understand how are you breaking up code. If you need things to run separately and you don't want to have to constantly comment something out, you may need to break those out into multiple code cells. So the next thing is, what is the scope of a cell? So for example, how do variables work? Do they work the same way they do in Management Studio? If you were just to highlight one, what happens? So first, I'm going to run this one where I'm declaring a variable with a date time. In my next cell, I'm going to see if it exists, and it doesn't. So just like in Management Studio, the variable has to be run with whatever needs to call it. You can't split those up. It works the same way. But again, it's just kind of that understanding of how these code cells work. So I pretty much have to run the two statements together, and now I can see, hey, it worked. I'm expecting the data I want to see. My variable worked. So now let's take it a step up and let's look at transactions. So let's look at explicit transactions. So I'm going to switch over to my superheroes database, and I'm going to begin a transaction. And I personally like naming transactions because I find it easier to identify where the problem's coming from, especially because it's an explicit transaction. I need to know which store procedure or whatever is to blame if something is blocking because of it. So I've switched databases and I'm running my transaction. And if I run dbcc OpenTran, it's saying nothing's there, but I haven't done anything, and that tends to be how OpenTran works, I find. So I don't quite trust it. So let me do something. I am going to run an update statement within my transaction, and I'm going to make myself Wonder Woman because I can. So I have my one record updated, and now I'm going to check my results. Woohoo! I'm Wonder Woman. I don't know why that amuses me, but it does. So we can see my update worked. So now let's see what our transaction looks like. I'm going to first run open transaction. And hey, I can see my transactions running, and I have an explicit transaction. It's holding locks. It's recognizing that there's an explicit transaction going on. I can run locks. And I can see that I'm locking things. So in other words, just like if you're doing Management Studio and you were doing things piece by piece by piece, running everything, it works the same way. So it's not running, I could run everything in a batch, but because I'm breaking everything up line by line, I'm keeping my transaction open. So it's one of those things to remember if you're using explicit transactions and you're going over different code cells, that transaction is done or open until you do something like hit the rollback in your next code cell. And now my transaction has been rolled back and I'm back to being an average citizen. So again, it works the same way, but again, thinking of each cell as that highlighted block that you would be using bit by bit. And that's actually one of the things that when you're using SQL Notebooks, you are doing things in small chunks. So you can see the results as you go through. And I think that's a really important thing to think about as you're setting that up and thinking of the different scenarios that you want to use those for. And the next question is select versus print. How do those appear when you're doing those? Because you get different results. If I run select, I get my grid here. The cool thing is I have also these different options. I can save my results as a CSV file. I can save it as Excel. I can send it to JSON, XML, or I can do charts if I have enough results where I want to see charts out. And I can save those, and those results are right here in the cell. If I do a print, I just get a statement up here. There is a question about having multiple connections. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. So I think in some ways it is kind of similar to how you would do it for even for Management Studio. I have my connection. Actually, I may be getting that to the next one, and so we'll deal with that with my next notebook. Are there any other questions about this section?
Chris asked if you're going to be covering table of contents for notebooks.
No, I am not. I actually haven't played with them, but it is a cool thing, and that may be the 102 version of this. I'm just kind of still got kind of a basic overview, but I haven't played with table of contents, but I do have some notebooks where you can actually kind of see those. So anything else yet, or?
No, not that I can see.
All right. So like I said, Mikhail had the question I see in the Q&A for Zoom about connections inside the notebook. So let's look at that. So the first thing is, for me, I want to know what database are we using? How do we know it's server? How does that transfer? And again, I guess it kind of is that multiple connections within the same file. So right now, how do we do this? So in some ways, I would say the connection strings kind of work similar to what we're used to. You have that database, the file is connected to that one connection. So right here, I happen to have been using this recent connection. You can have a whole bunch of other saved connections. I'm starting with this one. And again, the connection details work just like you would for any other query window where I'm connecting to. So I would say multiple connections. It's pretty similar to what you do for any query window from like Management Studio. That file has that one connection open. And if you need to open to another instance, you would work with it, probably have a different file open and connect that way. Or you're using like the open query or any of those sort of, I hate saying linked server, but you could set up a linked server and do it that way. But you're pretty much connected to that one simple database. So this is all connected to the one database. So right now, I have my connection to the master database. So when I change databases, I'm changing database in a separate cell. So I've changed my database. And now I'm in my superheroes database. And again, if I go back up here, again, I'm back in the superheroes database because I've already said use superheroes. So in some ways, this is kind of the same way that we're used to working in any other query window. I've got my notebook has that one connection to the one database. Now, notice here, I don't see which database I'm connected to. So this is actually kind of one of those things that you really want to pay attention to if you are doing cross database joins, or you're not sure, you're working between them. You're not going to see it through the connection string. So you really do need to pay attention to what that is. Maybe you, because you can create the multiple connections, maybe you have one that is set to the default database. So, oh, I know I want to start from here. You can change it there, or you can always make sure you have your used database at the top of the notebooks if you care about that. That's one thing I'd love to see more, and that's what I'm used to, but this is really, you're supposed to know when you connect which database you want to connect from, or which is your starting database. So I see a question in the Q&A, are multiple runs logged or just the last one?
That's a follow-up. I'm sorry, I answered that in the chat.
What was the first part of that?
With regards to if query results are saved.
We will get into how you save query results. Cool. But this one doesn't have quite the, I don't think it's here. I know there's something about, no, I don't think it's here, but we will get into saving your query results for later. That is coming up. But really right now it's just what we have as the last results. And it is kind of cool though, because I see the last results I ran here. So, but normally you're going back and forth between when you run things, and one of the cool things about notebooks is the results are with the query that you ran it. So I think that's kind of a cool thing to think about when you're dealing with this, because when I had run this against the master database, this was master, I could see that the two results are the change. So if you wanted to see the different results, being able to look at when I ran this query the first time, see results here, seeing the same results down here and the different things, it's really cool for a comparison. And I think that's one of the advantages of using SQL Notebooks and why people like using SQL Notebooks. So, so let's kind of move on. The next one is, we've been talking about SQL and T-SQL and our connection to SQL Server. The cool thing is you have PowerShell, and as DBAs, and there's so much stuff with PowerShell, I'm getting a little more familiar with it and finding a little more things and say, hey, I can use a PowerShell script for this. How does that work with SQL Notebooks? Because I think that's actually something that's pretty useful. And again, as PowerShell is becoming more common, it's something that we'll want to take advantage of. So the first thing to know is you have to have PowerShell installed, or actually you need Python installed in order to use PowerShell and SQL Notebooks. There were two steps that you have to do, and I have the images in here, and I'm trying to remember if I have, oh, I do have Zoom In installed. And sorry that they're a little fuzzy, but all it is 2 steps. If you don't have it installed, Azure Data Studio will prompt you. So the first one is you need to configure to run the PowerShell kernel. And I'm saying it's new Python. And as actually, depending on where you put Azure Data Studio, think about permissions when you need to say, hey, yes, I want to install Python on that machine. If that is something that you need to worry about in terms of where you're installing and what you want to be able to run, which kernels for SQL Notebooks you need to run. But one, I'm saying it's a new Python install. Step 2, install. And that's it. That's all I needed to do to install Python so I can run my PowerShell kernel. And let's see if I can get out of this. All right. Again, it was just a simple 2-step, took no time to run. The other thing is I also made sure I had the latest SQL Server modules installed, so that way I could run things that I want to do with SQL Server and PowerShell. So let's test. So I'm going to do the same sort of test that I did with the SQL cells. I'm going to create a variable in PowerShell, and then I'm going to call it from a separate code cell. So first one, here's my test variable. And now I can see what's in my variable. And the thing is, this is actually very consistent with how PowerShell works. You create a variable in one step, and then you go to the next one, and the variable's there. You can run a function, and after the function, you can still find what was in those variables, which is kind of a very convenient way to go back and see what you did in PowerShell. So this is working as you'd expect for PowerShell. Again, the behavior is different from SQL batches, but it works the way we want it to work. Now, the next thing is, one of the things that I liked is I like the idea of being able to combine PowerShell with SQL Server or with T-SQL, because I find certain things I'll do in PowerShell and then I need a script to run and then I need PowerShell. So can I do them back and forth? What happens if I change a kernel? Can I change the kernel, multiple kernels in the same notebook? So I'm going to change my kernel here to SQL, and I'm going to change in connection, which means I'll connect to something. I'm going to go to with this SQL Notebooks, which I now have set for my superheroes database. I'll stick with that from now on. And I just ran my SQL statement. So now that I've run to SQL, what does it mean for my PowerShell scripts? I can't do it because my kernel is SQL. So what this tells me is you can only have one kernel per SQL notebook. So if you're going to do notebooks, or if you want to use mostly PowerShell, maybe you want to save your SQL as a script, or use PowerShell to call your SQL query against the database. But it's either PowerShell or SQL, or if you're doing Python or you're doing Spark, it can only be one of those kernels in your notebooks at a time. So just something to kind of think about in terms of how you're planning out your notebooks. The other thing is, what version of PowerShell are we using? I'm back to PowerShell, and I'm going to double check. Right now, it is saying my PowerShell version is 5.1. I want to show you something kind of interesting. It's down here in this corner. You see this PowerShell. I actually have PowerShell 7.0 running as well. And if I were to start the PowerShell terminal, because you can have, again, this is cool that in Azure Data Studio, you can use a PowerShell terminal. You get to that through this terminal will open PowerShell inside Azure Data Studio. So you can see it down here. And if I were to run the same PS version table, you can see that my terminal understands that I've got PowerShell 7.0 installed. But right now within the code cells, it is still 5.1. You can't set that right now, but if you're using features and from a higher level of PowerShell, you may not be able to use it in the SQL notebooks right now. And I'm saying the word right now because maybe with next month's release, it could change. But right now, you'll want to pay attention if it matters which version of PowerShell you're using for whatever functionality that you're doing. Something to kind of keep in mind. So I'm going to get rid of the terminal by clicking X. So the next thing I want to know with PowerShell is, what about privileges? Because sometimes I need to run PowerShell as an admin. There are just certain things you need to be admin for. So I found this code on the interwebs. I have the link here, so you feel free to use that later, and I will be making all of these available for you to play with. So I found this function that says, hey, am I an administrator or not? So I've run that. And right now it's telling me, no, I am not an administrator. But if you'll notice at top here, I'm not logged into Azure Data Studio as an administrator. So what happens if I were to open Azure ADS as an admin? Would that change? I've been noticing some funky things on my machine lately, so I am going to live dangerously and reopen this way. So I am going to reopen Azure Data Studio. I'm going to say run as an admin. And it's giving me that warning because, you know, it likes doing that. So I'm reopening Azure Data Studio. And you can now see that I'm an administrator. Notice the fun thing is it kept everything how I've been working too. So all my stuff is still there. I'm going to go to Notebooks, and I have this this handy dandy functions put out by itself. So same function, run as test admin. And you can now see that I am true. I am now running PowerShell as an admin. So Azure Data Studio has to be running as an administrator for you to have the administrator privileges in SQL Notebooks to run PowerShell as an admin. So one of those things to think about. So the question is about global variables at a notebook level. So you try to do it as a temp table and store it. You know, I haven't played with global variables yet. I know how local variables work. If global variables, I'm trying to remember if you declare a global variable, if it does pass through. I may have to play with that one later. So we'll come back to that question. That's a great question. So if we have time at the end, we can try to set that up and see how that works. So let's keep that in mind. And yes, I agree that the kernel per connection per cell would be fantastic. You could make a request to in the Azure Data Studio GitHub and see if they make it as something that's available. Again, they're listening, and if this is something the community wants, they may be able to try to work it in. I don't know. So this is kind of getting familiar with how these SQL notebooks work. So let's try some examples and try to figure out how we can get those working in our day-to-day environment. Because honestly, this is all great, but how do you use it? These are fun. So how would we use those? So let's start with a nightly ETL load, because oftentimes you have the data feeds and something always goes wrong. And I kind of find that there's probably a lot of things that tend to go wrong fairly frequently. And it's the same sort of things that you're looking at over and over. So let's take a look at that. So our scenario is Andy, the intern, has been tasked with the ETL load task. So thank you very much to Andy, the intern, for all his work. Lately, database operations team have been receiving reports with the same errors over and over. So these are kind of the queries that we wanted to give to our database ops people so they can go through and test it. But note, and this is where we're having fun with formatting, we want to see the results. Development wants to see the results so we can figure out whether the problem is with the file on the client side or if it's actually something wrong with the code. But being able to save those results and look at them is something we want to do. So this is something we were kind of talking about earlier that was coming up earlier. So first thing is I'm going to take this and I'm going to save this here, and we're going to call this our GroupBy ETL troubleshooting. GroupBy ETL troubleshooting. So we now have our new notebook, and we'll show why this is kind of important in a second. But again, we want to be able to see the results later, and we don't want to save our template file. I guess we could call it our template notebook. So the first thing is we want to see if there's any bad dates. We've said that we just added this in 2020, and anything with dates before 2020 we know are bad. So what do we have here? So I'm going to connect to my SQL Notebooks and my superheroes database. And we're going to check, and yeah, I've got some dates that are all before January 1st, 2020. So first new thing that we have to look at is we've got some bad data in our ETL loads because the dates don't match. So great. So we know we can go to our source file and look those up. So the next thing is we're going to check our error log. Any load errors? Those weren't load errors, those are just bad data. But now if we look in here, we can see we've got a couple error translations. We've got things that aren't found. We have people that aren't found. We have some translation errors, mismatched values. Okay, so we may have to go back to our ETL and look at the file and figure out why we have translation errors or mismatched numbers. So that indicates there's issues with the files. But these first ones, those feel like those are things that we should have set up already. So we need to dig into those a little more. So let's start with a person not found. Could it be that, is it the person's not there, or is there the way the data is set up incorrect? So the first one is we're looking for our people not found. So we have 2 records. Now let's look for things where we know the name is reversed. So we know how to figure that out. And so now I can see the reverse. Names are reversed. Yep, I'm there, but the CSV data has my name wrong, or it put my last name where my first name should be. We couldn't interpret it. All right, that's data that we'll have to go back and fix. Now we have to say, is anyone missing? So I have my, again, my query is already done. I already know how to figure out if the person's not there. And yep, we have a person there. Tony Stark is not in our database. Wait, is that right? Who do we have in our database? Which people are there? So let me take a look. And I don't see Tony Stark there, but I'm seeing some junk data. These are not right. Wait a minute, I thought, hang on a second. Remember we had that one client which has the file, which has the bad data that we can't get rid of. So we know that. So I can put that in my notebook with a description. There's a client with known bad data for my person file. We know what they are because we know what the last name is, and we already have permission to remove them. We just need to record that, yep, we found them and that we removed them. So I've got my 2 code cells here. Select, because you don't want to delete. You want to check your delete statement by selecting the data first. So I know I'm getting my 3 rows. Changed it to my delete here and 3 rows. And we're saving this all for a second, so that way we can bring it into, we'll save the results. So I'll show you how that looks late in just a second. But again, we've got our record of, we've deleted, these were the 3 original rows, and now we can safely delete them. But there was something else that we still need to look from our ETL file. It's our good deeds not found. So we have a set of list of good deeds here. And look, I can document them. These are what we need to look for. So first we need to confirm if any good deeds were in this list that we're not expecting. Yep. Okay, but this also means there's a problem because this one should exist and it doesn't. So now we need to see, are we missing something from our default list? Is it not looking correct? And well, I'm already seeing that there's 10 rows and that's not the number I'd listed. And some of these stuff, there's duplicates and steal from for give to self. I think some villain may have been messing with our good deed types. So I'm going to say we're going to need to send this back to development, figure out what happened, figure out how this bad data got there, and figure out how to clean it up. So I'm going to stop this right here, and I'm actually going to save everything as they are, this is. Because that's the thing. This is something that the database ops team ran against the production database where we now have bad data. So because I saved this, I'm going to close that notebook, but I'm going to open again because this is one of the really cool things that you can do with SQL Notebooks. And where did that get saved? Here it is. I saved in the wrong folder, but I can open this up here. And notice all my results are saved. So being able to communicate between what you see in operations and what you need to see in development, it's all here. Think about what we had been doing. So when you would send a whole series of queries and you have all the different results. So you take each result, you send it to an Excel spreadsheet, and then you'd have to try to coordinate the spreadsheet with the query that was ran. And we don't have to do that. I've got one place I can look. And if someone else came up with a query, what if it was the wrong query? Oh, I can see, yeah, this is why that query didn't work. Maybe this was a different date or something like that. And you can then go into your template, go off, but you can save everything and you can see what was run. And being able to have that history, especially for troubleshooting and working between different teams, I think this is a really cool way of communicating and sharing that pieces of information. So it's really kind of exciting to be able to do that. Teob has a question. Can we not use % to use T-SQL and PS kernel? I think that is a question that I haven't used yet. But my thing is, if you're using a code cell, I'm assuming this is about the Powershell connection in the code. That is something else I would have to test. I haven't played with that, but if you can do it in PowerShell, my guess is you can probably, from the PowerShell terminal, my guess is you can do that in the code cell for PowerShell when you're using it, the notebook in the PowerShell kernel. Because what I've been finding is, one of the things I've been playing with is working it out in my PowerShell terminal, and then I've taken it and I've copied it into my code cell, and I run it as a code cell. So if it works there, my guess is that it'll probably work in the code cell too. that is something else to play with. I haven't had a chance to use that, but that's a great thing to kind of play with. So I would definitely try that. Yeah, let me know how it works, Teo. I'm really curious about that one. That's a great question. Any other questions? All right, or we're getting to those.
It's quiet here.
Okay, so I'm assuming everyone's following along, and these are definitely great
your
questions.
attendee number is still going up, so you're doing something right.
Yay! Thank you all for joining. I hope you're finding it useful. But again, a lot of this stuff is being able to see what's here and figuring out what to play with next. And that's kind of like seeing what's possible. Oh, hey, if I can do it here, can I do it here? And so hopefully you're seeing things that you're like, oh, I want to go and I want to start playing with that. So, and that's kind of what I want to do, is making sure you're feeling comfortable doing that as well. So the next one that I want to do is, I've had a lot of experience having to do these catch-all procs. I know we've seen them, and some of them we call them procs, but they start off with that data layer that's created those massive catch-all SQL scripts, which are horrible for performance, and other people have full sessions figuring out how do you deal with those. I've had we'll call it pleasure of having to take those and turn those into dynamic SQL stored procedures. And then you start performance tuning based on there. It's a lot of fun. We'll call it fun. It's a good challenge. I'll put it that way. And I had to do one of these recently, and thinking about it, SQL Notebooks could be a really great way to kind of, not just for me to be able to troubleshoot them, see how things are working, see how things aren't working, but I'm not going to be the only person working on that proc. I have teammates who may have to look at the proc. Maybe I'm on vacation and they need to go in and they need to troubleshoot. There's something missing. They need to make a fix. Or maybe something isn't returning the way we'd want from the application. So you need to have your database ops team be able to have a way to look at things, troubleshoot things, and help figure out, okay, this is why it's working, this is why it isn't, or even be able to start the process to say, here's where I started, here's what it's looking like, I don't think this is right. So that way you can work with them, or maybe it's the QA team or someone else, being able to collaboratively work on these sort of stored procedures, because debugging a dynamic SQL stored proc, especially if it's one for a catch-all query, those are kind of a pain. So that's kind of what this next one is. This was a scenario that I thought of that, hey, maybe this is a way I could use SQL Notebooks to help me. And that's something I can use with my coworkers. So the scenario is, I've got this catch-all search stored procedure, and we know there are going to be bugs because, of course, there are bugs. So I want to see what the different options are. I want to be able to, when I do dynamic SQL stored procedures, I create we'll call it a secret debug option. So it's a parameter that for the stored procedure that's set to 0 by default, but when it's set to 1, you can actually see the SQL that's generated. I find that's my pro tip, because I find it so super useful for troubleshooting the dynamic SQL that's created. And then I'm kind of creating up in this notebook, setting up a way we can reuse the code for fixing bugs, and it kind of sets up the environment really well so we can figure out how to do the different tests and see if things work. So the first thing is, I want to run the query showing all the options that are available so I can see everything here. And I'm setting everything to the defaults that I've created in my stored proc. So I'm running this, and we're going to connect to my SQL Notebooks. And I'm running, and so now I can see everyone that I have in my database and what their alter ego name is, if they have an alter ego. So now I'll show you my debug option, which I didn't have here. You don't need it because it's set to 0, but when you have 1, now I'm running the same thing. And here's an example of how a print statement works with your select statement in the same result set, I guess you want to call it. Here in my debug option, you can see my SQL statement. That's done as a print statement. And now you can see here, I've got my result set. So now I want to test a couple different scenarios so we can see how those work. So again, this is kind of creating my little unit testing for my store proc. If I'm doing just the last name, I'm searching based on someone's last name. And this person is not existing in the database, which is weird. Let's try and change that one. They should. There we go. So I've got someone returned with the last name of Carter, and that's working as expected. So now I want to include anyone who is just an average citizen. Oh, I want to say, am I returning just superheroes, or am I including superheroes and our average citizens? So I'm going to run this twice, once with the average citizen and the ones which are just our superheroes. So we can see here, I've got everyone. We can see here in this result, I just have my superheroes. That's working as expected. Now I have an option where my scenario for this database is that we sell equipment and gadgets to superheroes across all the different comic universes, because you can't be a good superhero if you don't have the right equipment, so you need to be able to order them. So if someone has orders, we want to see what those are. And if we do that, we actually get an extra column. So we want to see how that works. And so now we have our orders due. And so we have a total dues if anyone has any outstanding orders. So I've got my order placed. It's all good. And so the next query that we want to look at, we want to return based on the alter ego. So we want to see who the current alter ego is. And then we want to see anyone who has been that alter ego, because, people change. Different people could be that alter ego. So right now, currently, we have one person as Wonder Woman, but we had two people who were Wonder Woman. But notice here in my documentation, the alter ego name should display the current alter ego. Unfortunately, I currently am just an average citizen. I was Wonder Woman, but now I'm just an average citizen. So unfortunately, it means I have a bug in my store procedure. So now we want to figure out, how do we fix it? Because again, dynamic SQL, lots of fun, right? So now this is why I create my secret debug option, so we can see what the SQL statement is. So now I have my SQL statement here. I can copy that. And I've already set up my notebook so I can have everything in place so I can start testing it. For example, I've created a code cell here so I can copy my print statement, put it here, and do a little bit of cleanup so it's a little bit easier to read. So now I've got my basic code statement here, and I can run it and I can see, yep, that's what it is. So there are a couple ways. First, I want to figure out how to fix this. The good news is I've made this easy. You don't have to see me try to fix the code. So I've already have my fix statement here. And where did that go? That's hiding back on my other screen. So first thing is, all right, so I've created a place for myself to do the work. So this is what I want my statement to actually look like to return things properly. And now that I know what this is supposed to look like, I can actually work within created the guts in another place. And again, I've saved a little bit of time. And I've actually figured out what the fix is. So if I run this, I can go down here, I can see what my new statement is, I can compare with what I put above. I have this right here, I can see that this is correct. And I've also said where I've saved what the store procedure fixed looks like. So I can now go in, I can open my file all through Azure Data Studio. I can go open my file because I have the text. Can go back through. Okay. This, I can replace everything. And this is just a query within Azure Data Studio. And I always hit the wrong thing. So I want to connect to my database. And this, it looks a lot more familiar where we can see the database like we do for Management Studio. We just don't have that within our SQL notebooks. I can hit run, go back to my notebooks, and now I can run and I can see the correct results. And again, because this is the notebooks, I can go back, scroll up, and see the incorrect version, go down to the correct version, and I can see what it's doing. So I can prove that, yep, this was the wrong version. I can see all my fixes, and then I can conclude with, now I see it's correct. And that's all in the same notebook. And I have this because I'm going to have other fixes for the store procedure, I'm sure. So, but I've created the template for me to work from. So I thought that was another way I could use notebooks and have it work for me. And also set it up so my coworkers have access to this and they can work with it too. And they can see where things need to be. I even said, you can find your file here. So any questions on that? Any other questions that have popped up that we haven't seen yet?
You have some feedback from Ty, who says, I think that was in response to our last time where there were no questions, that you're doing a great job presenting, and it's hard to ask questions when you're a newbie. So I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay.
There are no further questions at this point.
Okay, great. Yeah, and hopefully this will be encouraging you to start playing with this. Like, it's really hard when you're new to know where to start. That's why I was kind of like, huh. And that's kind of why I was like, all right, let's start playing with it. So hopefully, if you're new to it, you'll feel encouraged to start playing around with it yourself, and because you can start seeing little things. And again, you want to start with little, and then you can figure out where to go from there. So the cool thing with notebooks is, I've kind of alluded to this, the community is really trying to create stuff so they can share. I mean, I feel like that's actually one of the biggest things with notebooks. I'm creating examples that I can share with my coworkers, or they can share with me as we're trying to fix things. But the idea of being able to share notebooks is really one of the big things. I mean, again, I talked about here where we had the provided book, but there are a couple other people who've made their notebooks available. For example, I'm going to start with Glenn Berry. He's presenting, actually, I think is he presenting today in the next session on the data?
Next session.
Yeah, next session. I think he's on the admin track.
Yes.
But a lot of us know him for his diagnostic queries. Well, guess what? He turned them into notebooks. So I can go over, let me open a new folder because I have saved those locally. And I'm selecting the folder. You know what? I don't want to save those right now. So I now go to my notebooks. One thing, notice I had a pinned notebook for my other folder. It is still showing here, but I've changed my folders and it's pulled up all the notebooks that exist there. And that is my Glenn Berry diagnostic information queries. So this is really useful. Again, if maybe you don't need to run all of them against your server, you can take these, giving Glenn credit, and you can pick and choose which ones you need to run. For some reason, it takes a little longer to load on my machine. I'm just going to blame my machine on that. But if I want to see different things, I can go here. So let's say I want to go down to query. I think I was looking at query 56 for some reason, and I don't remember why that rings a bell, but it does. But again, you have all of the different Glenn Berry queries, and you can also see the nice information that he puts together about what it's telling you. You've got again, this is kind of why SQL notebooks are really great, because you've got all of this extra documentation, and it makes it so much more readable than just comments. And you've got the links, so if you need to go somewhere else, you can just click here, for example, and it will open up or prompt you to open up the notebook. My prompt may be hiding on a different page, but you can definitely open up links from here. Oh, there it goes. It's just being a little slow. Do you want to open your external link? You can copy it. You can hit open. If you didn't mean to click it, you can hit cancel. But again, being able to do that directly from your notebooks is still kind of cool. And I clicked it twice. All right, it's just being a little slow. So let's look at query 56. I can expand my query and I can see everything. It is nice that you can collapse or expand as needed. And let's say I want to include my query plan, because the one thing I didn't quite point out right now with SQL Notebooks, if you're noticing for the SQL plans or the SQL cells, is execution plans aren't included. And I think that's one of the big things for people who are doing development work. If you want to use the execution plans, they're not built into those SQL Notebook code cells. I'd love to see that as an option, because as a developer, a lot of things, if someone's having performance issues in production or in a different environment, I want to see that execution plan, and I just don't have access to it from the SQL Notebooks. I mean, you could do stuff like find a query where you do have the query plan, run that, SQL Notebooks, and let's pull this against my superheroes database. You know, and I can get the XML of it once this finished returning. Oops. Scroll over, and I've got my show plan XML, and I can save this off and I can go from there. But it's not the same as having it as part of this the script that's executed, or being able to do it through, let's say, running it when you do through like Plan Explorer or Management Studio, where you get the show plan as well. That's the one thing I'd love to see in SQL Notebooks that isn't there. But you could do stuff like this, find your query plan, save it with the same notebook if that's what you need to do for troubleshooting. It's not perfect, but again, things are improving. But you still have options like this, where you've got the diagnostic information queries that are shared from the community. So there's still ways to get that information and build those in. So much great stuff is shared through the community. But again, knowing that you could do these diagnostic queries through SQL Notebooks. There's actually also another thing that I want to show you. It was released, I think, in the past as an extension in the past couple of weeks. I think his name is Emmanuel Meazzo, and he created an extension. I don't want to save this for diagnostics, and it is so extensions. If you want to get those through SQL Notebooks, is if you click. Sorry, my machine, for some reason my machine always runs a little slow with this notebook. You have options to add extensions, and honestly, when you're playing with Azure Data Studio, look into some of these. These are not all notebooks, these are Azure Data Studios, but one of the ones installed is this SQL Server Diagnostic Book. Someone had asked about table of contents. I don't know if that's part of the extension packs or building extensions, but there's a collection of notebooks that you can install as an extension. And I've installed it, and I'm going to open my folder, and I have it saved here. And when I open this and go to my notebooks, so we have this diagnostic book, and we can see all of these different things. Glenn Berry's diagnostics are included there as well. You have the first responder kit, who is active, all of these different things. And, you know, again, this great notebook with all this great information. And so this is available. You can install it now if you want to. The other thing is I will have this in my slide deck that I will be making available, but there are a whole bunch of other community resources available to you. For example, Microsoft, and there has a GitHub right here with all these great SQL Server 2019 notebooks, where definitely stuff worth looking into if, again, as you're trying to learn, a great starting point. They have a sample T-SQL notebook for getting started, intelligent query processing, in-memory, availability, Unicode, all these great things so you can get started learning how to do it. Troubleshooting notebook, so common scenarios. So this is definitely a great resource to look at. If you want to automate your notebooks, Aaron Nelson has this blog post on how you can schedule your notebooks to run. There are a couple things with that. I haven't had a need to do this, but definitely being able to automate some of this stuff, because as we're getting there, you've created a run book of common things you need to do. Sometimes you want it step by step. Sometimes you need to run everything. you have these options as well. Another thought, this is SQL DBA with a beard. I believe that's Rob Sewell. Yes, it is. He has created some things. So you can create Azure Data Studio notebooks with PowerShell. So if you really want to get fancy, you've got this option too, which I think is a really cool concept. And Rob Sewell does a lot with SQL Notebooks, so he knows a lot more stuff than I do. Again, I'm still kind of playing with things and learning with things. So, I'm still trying to figure out, this is a great tool. How can I use it? So definitely, there's a lot of stuff in the community to get you started with SQL Notebooks. Now, one of the other things that I'll mention is there's an announcement that came out last week. And again, the other thing with Azure Data Studio is a lot of stuff is changing very frequently. So you definitely want to keep your eye out for all of the different changes, not just for notebooks, but for Azure Data Studio, because they just announced that Management Studio, the 18.7 release, will also automatically install Azure Data Studio. But so it's really kind of cool that they're saying Management Studio is not going anywhere. Azure Data Studios it's making it easier to find and use. But again, Management Studio isn't going anywhere. But even before that release, you could still do stuff with Management Studio and Azure Data Studio and notebooks, in fact. So let me open up my Management Studio for a second and show you one way that we can connect. Any other questions while this is opening?
No, I don't think so. I just realized, just as a simple use case, I had a customer call the other week where I had to email the customer a bunch of SQL scripts to ask them, what does your database look like? And do you have this feature? Do you have that? What's the distribution like in that table? And I should really have sent them a SQL workbook. That would have simplified my work so much.
Right. And so now that you start creating that common collection of scripts that you're doing, right. You can put them in a notebook and say, and you have the documentation, hey, I want to check what this is, or I want to see what this is. So maybe you don't need to run everything, but you've got the thing, this query you can run, and you can explain why you want each query and what you're looking for too. Because that's also the reminder.
It's good documentation too.
Absolutely. So one of the things is I was kind of realizing last night as I was putting stuff together for this, I was like, my scripts aren't quite set up the way I want them to. I've been working with this database as a demo database for a couple of different sessions, and I need different things set up. And it was looking a little messy last night. So I am making everything available on GitHub. And I was looking at my GitHub for my database creation script, and I'm like, ooh, I've got issues. So I can kind of help you with some of the things that I didn't think looked right last night. And we can do that. Let's do that now. So one of the things is I'm in Management Studio, I'm connecting to my database, and I'm going to my tasks, and I'm going to generate some scripts. And I'm just going to do my tables here. Right here, set my scripting options. I can save as a notebook. So let's go and let's put this in the right folder. So my GroupBy, and we'll call this GroupBy table scripting. Yep, and we'll save there, and let's go to advanced. And you know what? I'm not just going to give you the schema. I'm going to give you the data because, again, I was kind of looking at the data. I was looking a little off. So I'm going to script this. I'm going to click OK. Next. Getting all my tables, scripted those out, finish. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to close the folder, and I'm going to switch back to the folder that I've been working from for Practical Starter notebooks. And I've been doing this for a couple other places, so I do have some of those notebooks available if you wanted to see past presentations. And since I don't want to see those here, I can just close those notebooks, get those at that one we're dealing with. This one we're going to close. I'll close this one. So GroupBy table scripting. So we just created this notebook, scripted it out from Management Studio. And so now we can see everything scripted out. We've got the headers, We've got our indexes, everything's labeled. And if I scroll down to the end, hey, I've got my data. Now, one of the things we kind of talked about earlier is maybe I don't want this here. I actually wanted this to be moved up. So I can move these around now. Oh, wait, that got in the wrong spot. So maybe I want these to go in a certain order. So I can now take these, I can move my cell blocks up and down, reorder this. So that way, if you just run it, all my data will get added in the correct order. It's all in this one little script here. If I wanted to add extra information, or let's say this is a history, I don't want history because I believe this is actually the history for a system version table, and maybe I don't want that installed by default. Maybe I do, I haven't decided yet, but I've got the option to deal with it here, nicely scripted out from SQL Server. So it's available for y'all to play with. So again, Management Studio is not going anywhere, but it just created a really cool thing that I can now create a notebook from. Any questions with that?
I don't think so.
All right, so we just have a couple minutes.
Super smooth feature. I had no idea it was there.
Right? It's hiding, but once you know it's there, it's like, ooh, that's kind of cool.
And now I'm gonna remember it.
Yeah. So those are the demos that I kind of had. And oh, right, we want to check in our code, right? Because I said I was going to make this available. So let me do that right now. I did want to move where that my troubleshooting script was, because I didn't save that in the right folder. So
one thing that comes to mind is if you save all of the data that the query returns, you may want to be careful running queries that return like a gigabyte of data, like you would in Management Studio when you're just like starring stuff.
Right. Yeah, so I just saved this somewhere else, but that's also where you've got the option where like, okay, maybe I don't want to save it here. Maybe that's a good time to, export it to Excel or export it into a different format or something like that. Or, so you still have options. Maybe you don't, at that point, you don't want to store it with a notebook or something, but you're right. It is all saved in that file, but we want to save these anyway. This is actually a fun thing that I've been enjoying with Azure Data Studio is I have it connected to my source control. So I said I had a GitHub. So let me just share a couple things with you. So this is our table scripting that we just did. So I'm going to stage that. And is this the right? Yep, this one is the right thing. I have a bunch of other junk here. So we'll just keep those changes. So we're let's commit these because typing during demo is always a great idea. Live. Thanks for coming. So, and now I'm going to, commit my stage changes and now I can push my changes. Let's go back here and open my GitHub. And all of these should be available to you. And you can see that these are now available for you to play with. So any other questions?
Yes, Mikhail was wondering if we could open the Jupyter notebooks in SSMS.
They are JSON files. So that's a great question. This one's an easy one to test. My guess is you probably can. My guess is they won't look pretty because they're JSON. Yeah, I see you shielding your eyes there. Yeah, it's a JSON file, so technically you can, but you can't run it.
Yeah.
So.
And Mary just added to our discussion. Yes, I tried with a large table. SQL Notebook had significant performance hit compared to Management Studio.
Okay.
So
yeah. So yeah, so there is that. So definitely be aware of that just with everything else. So advantages of notebooks, documentation, being able to collaborate. those saving your results with those queries, multiple queries. Same tool for multiple kernels. Doing PowerShell, you can automate them. Shared resources through the community. And I mean it when I say the Azure Data Studio team is paying attention. They are listening. They want to hear from you. So if you find things, you know, like it sounded like we found a little bug earlier. So we should let them know, hey, this was the behavior was a little funky. Is that a bug? And we can let them know. They do care, and they are listening, and they are paying attention, and they want you to use it. They are very invested in it, which I think is amazing. There are some limitations. 1 kernel per notebook. It'd be great to see more, but right now, not so much. No execution plan for the query that you run in notebooks. If you're a developer and you really care about performance tuning, it may not work the way you'd like it to. And again, it's a new tool. How do you adjust to it? So I have a whole bunch of other references in here. Definitely take a look at those. They are on, you're already asking questions on SQL Slack and the community channel for GroupBy. There is one for Azure Data Studio. They are on Twitter. Definitely, they are paying attention if you need any help. There are a lot of people out there who know so much more about SQL Notebooks than I do. I'm still learning them myself. There's always more to learn, and there's always constant changes to it. If you have any other questions, let me know. I'm making this available. Definitely, you can get to my session. I'll have a PDF of this, updated PDF of this later, and you can see already some of the updated scripts. So have fun with those. And just thank you for coming. And this picture is done by the daughter of Deepthi Gogure Nakshatra. And she made this for all of the GroupBy presenters to add on our thank you page. And so thank you to Nakshatra, and make sure you catch Deepthi later as well. I'll put a plug in for her because she's awesome. And any other questions? Thank you all so much for coming.
So Brian says, got in late. How do we get to the GitHub? I actually tried Googling, but I'm not getting a clear concession.
Which GitHub?
The one where you put your notebook and your scripts.
Let's see if I still have that up. It's here. You can also get to it through my I have a blog, debthedba.wordpress.com, and you can get to it through there. So I'm trying to think if it's easiest to do this, or if it's easier to get my, let me go to the other screen and see if I can get the thing for a better thing for that.
I just pasted the link into the chat window.
Okay, you got it? All right.
You'll have to go Google otherwise.
Yeah, but debthedba.wordpress.com. I'm on Twitter, DG Melkin, so you can ping me from there, or you should be able to find my blog from there. And you can get to that. Yeah, absolutely.
Theo
Thank you
says,
so much.
Thank you. And Andy asks, can we build a dashboard of charts from multiple notebooks? That sounds like next level.
I do think it is next level. My guess is you can probably export the different charts into Excel or something, pull it Excel in, and then create charts that way. Or I don't know if you can do Power BI directly into the results from that. That is a little next level. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer for that, but that's a great question though.
Yeah, Aliu says, awesome, thanks. And Julie says, great presentation, Deborah.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for coming. And thank you
super
all for wanting
psyched
to see this.
Yeah, I thought it was a great presentation. I have a couple of takeaways that I'm going to start using after this. Cool. So thank you so much.